Thank you everyone attending online today for this Genie Lunch and Learn session. I'd like to start this meeting by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land on which we meet today. I'm from Perth, and so that's home of the Whadjuk people. Michelle is coming to you from Brisbane, home of the Turrbal and Yarragara people. We would like to pay our respects to elders past, present and emerging. Today, we're going to look at how to resolve some of the issues practices may encounter when submitting bulk bill, DVA and Eclipse claims via Medicare Web Services. I'll give a brief overview of what Medicare Web Services is, and then we'll get into transaction IDs, authentication requirements and common validation errors. There will be a Q&A session at the end, so if you've got any questions relating to Medicare Web Services, we'll talk about that then. There is a Q&A panel at the bottom of the screen, which you can enter those details into. So what is Medicare Web Services? It's a technological change that's been introduced by Services Australia, replacing the existing HIC online adapter technology with RESTful web services. This change shifts Medicare's online claiming technology in line with current industry ICT standards. Patient claims, bulk bill, DVA, Eclipse claims, and air lodgements now transmit via Medicare Web Services for practices on a compatible version of Genie. Authentication now occurs in PRODA rather than through the HIC adapter and certificates. The technology change has also introduced an increased level of scrutiny to transactions, which is what we will focus on in this webinar. Although not directly related to Medicare claiming, I wanted to make a quick note on certificates, as we've had queries about which ones can be deleted from the PSI store. Security certificates are used to identify you with an external organisation, such as Medicare or the Australian Digital Health Agency, ADHA. Although HIC location certificates are no longer required for claiming with Medicare Web Services, they are still needed currently for practices that use the NASH method to connect to My Health Record and should be maintained as such. Other certificates, such as the NASH certificate itself and Mater Hospital portal certificates, are still required for users accessing those services. In the past, you may have referenced a batch number for claim ID when speaking with Medicare or Genie support. For claims submitted via Medicare Web Services, this is no longer used. All items submitted in a batch will still have this batch number applied to them, but they are for internal account management with Genie only. There's not going to be a record of that number at Medicare's end. Instead, a transaction ID will be assigned to the claim. A successful transmission to Medicare will have a transaction ID. This is the way both Genie and Medicare now identify claims transmitted through web services. In the bulk bill transmission area or in the AMC claims area, highlight the relevant claim and click the View Transmission button. The transmission or claim date and relevant transaction ID will be shown. You may need to quote this to us or Medicare when investigating a claim's progress or a received exception. So authentication. We are leveraging our Genie Cloud services to both authenticate and transmit claims to Medicare. This means that the work that used to be performed by the HIC online adapter that sat alongside Genie on client computers is now being done in the cloud. Existing and newly onboarded Genie customers' minor IDs, your GEN number, have been linked to our organizational PRODA. For the authentication to work, the Genie Cloud adapter, which is automatically installed with Genie, needs to be running along with Genie's web server. The cloud adapter is not used to transmit claims, but it is used to authenticate Genie practices with our cloud platform. This means that both the cloud adapter and web server need to be running to use Medicare online services. Additionally, when Genie sends a claim, it uses a new endpoint URL pointing to our platform API. If your Genie is on a network that requires whitelisting of specific URLs and ports, this should be discussed with your IT provider. We can provide details on the relevant ports and URLs as required. When connecting to the cloud, the claim will be packaged with an authentication token. The authentication token is how we recognize that the request is coming from your Genie and that it has the right permissions to make that request. If the cloud adapter hasn't been configured, it can't recognize your Genie and won't be able to retrieve the authentication token. Usually the cloud adapter is configured automatically when it is installed. However, occasionally it needs manual input to configure correctly, such as if the security permissions on the computer or network don't allow access to the cloud adapter. If this occurs and you receive this error 999, submit a ticket to our Genie support team and one of them will be in touch to assist you. After updating to a compatible version of Genie, the most recent being Genie version 9.4.7, you'll need to activate Medicare Web Services. This is simply a requirement by Medicare to authenticate your connection with their systems. When you log into Genie, you'll receive a prompt to activate web services by verifying a patient's Medicare details. You can search for an existing patient at your practice or enter a Medicare card detail directly into the window. If you ignore the prompt, any attempts to transmit claims to Medicare will receive a location not recognized error until a patient is successfully verified. Once activated, claiming can continue as normal. The 9007 error may occur if a practice is new to Genie or new to using Medicare online and has paperwork incomplete or outstanding with Medicare. However, the most likely reason for this error is because web services has not been activated yet. If you miss the prompts for activating upon update, then we also have an option in the file menu to activate web services. So this brings up the same Medicare details as the prompts. Error 401 failed to send data to Medicare Online. The incoming token has expired. The authentication tokens I mentioned before that allow your Genie to be recognized when transmitting claims expire and are renewed regularly. If your cloud adapter has stopped running or is unable to synchronize with Genie service for over an hour, then the authentication token will expire and you'll receive this error when trying to transmit a claim. The cloud adapter must be restarted in order to generate new tokens and allow you to continue claiming as normal. If you continue to receive the error after the cloud adapter restart, try navigating to Special and then update Genie registration to refresh the connection on our servers. And I've just shown it here where you've got the cloud adapter and restart option in there. Error 500. This error indicates an issue with Genie's Medicare Online service that is causing a miscommunication with Genie and Medicare Web Services itself. This could be due to Medicare experiencing a degradation in their services. If that occurs, multiple Genie practices will typically be affected and it may take longer to get through to our support line. We will put up a message on the hold so that you're aware that this is an ongoing issue if you're contacting us that way. But you can check if the relevant service is running on the Services Australia system status page. So we have a link to that on our knowledge base. Occasionally, it can occur with an older claim that was created in Genie prior to updating to web services. But if other claims are working okay or there's no known service outage, submit a ticket to Genie support as usual. The error 504, a HTTP status error, where the endpoint request is timed out. This may be an issue with Medicare Web Services itself, or could relate to a local network or security change, such as a firewall or general connectivity issues. Restart Genie's web server and cloud adapter by going to File, Cloud Adapter, Restart. And then all users, if that doesn't work, you can try logging all users out of Genie and restarting the Genie server machine itself. Then once that's been done, attempt to transmit your claim again and it should go through as expected. So those were the transmission type errors, but I'll now want to talk about data validation. This is probably the main, once you've activated web services, this is probably the main area that you'll see issues pop up when trying to transmit claims. Medicare's processing has become much more strict in how it handles the content of claims. The values being transmitted must meet very specific criteria. If any part of the claim doesn't fit with that structure, Medicare will then fail it and you'll be alerted with the data validation error. The content of the error will typically provide pretty good clues as to which part of the claim is causing an issue. This could relate to the provider details, to the patient or the account holder. Data validation issues could also relate to the referral, the service details, or the claim submission itself. I'll step through some examples of errors that have been submitted to our support team. And just be aware that for each of these examples, there are resources on the knowledge base to assist in resolving them, as well as others that aren't specifically called out here, but where we've seen them come through. So the first error I want to talk about is our 902 error. This we see happen probably it's the most common that practices are likely to encounter. It can relate to almost any area of the claim. So it's the content of the message itself that needs to be read to determine what is causing the error in this instance. In this case, I'm looking at the facility ID. So we've got here invalid value of 0.0.0 supplied for facility ID, and the value supplied must be in the format of a provider stem, practice location, and check digit. Essentially, what it's telling us is that the facility ID is incorrect because it doesn't meet the minimum requirements Medicare expects for this field. And in this case, the facility ID is used to identify the hospital where an inpatient service was performed. So you'd only see this error occur on an inpatient service being transmitted. And the reason that in this case there's an error is because the value is zeros, it's blank. So it hasn't been set in the user preferences. So to resolve this error, go into the user preferences. And I can just point out here, this is where it's noting that that was the issue. Go into the file, all user preferences, and select the provider. So double click on the provider to open up their record. Go across the top to the practice sites tab, and then double click on the location and enter the facility ID. You can find a list of facility IDs available for download on the Department of Health website. And once the facility ID has been updated, go back into the invoice itself in the patient's account history, select the site of service again. So open up the invoice, select the site of service again on that invoice to refresh the facility ID on that claim, and then you should be able to retransmit without any issues. So another 9202 error is relating to future date or timed services. Medicare has increased the strictness of the medical event timestamp. This means that whether the claim is being submitted just a few minutes or a few days ahead of the service time, you will receive an error to say that it is in the future. So if I have a patient who's coming in at 9:30, but their actual appointment is booked for 10, then when I try to submit that claim at, say, 9:30, 9:45, Medicare will tell me, no, you've got a service time of 10 o'clock. So your submission is in advance of their service. The best way to prevent this is to bill the service that has occurred, so after it has occurred, and to ensure that the service time entered matches the time that the service was actually rendered. If your clinic runs as a first in, first seen, then you may need to be a bit more vigilant about this. When you invoice from the appointment book, it will default to using the appointment time as the service time when you add the item. So if a patient does arrive earlier than their booked appointment and is seen straight away, you can edit the service time when adding items to your invoice. So that's just down here where there's service date and service time. If you forget to do this and the time that you submit the claim is earlier than the service date, it will result in the error. You can then resolve that if it's already been attempted to submit and getting the error, you can modify it in the patient's account history. So select the invoice on the left-hand side and then double click on the item on the right-hand side, and then click edit down at the bottom. That will allow you then to adjust the service date and time, depending on what is causing the error. And then once you've done that, click save. And you will be able to resubmit the claim using the create patient claim in the account history or through your bulk bill DVA IMC transmission as usual. The next error, still a 9202 error, just to give you an idea of the broadness that this can cover, is to do with invalid characters. So in this particular example, only certain characters are permitted, and this will vary depending on the field. For example, the charge field, which is how much the service was billed at, only accepts numeric characters. The service text field, on the other hand, accepts numeric and alpha characters. It also accepts some special characters and spaces, but it is pretty strict about which characters and how to use spaces. So in the example error that we have here, it's telling us that the invalid value of St Andrew's Hospital was supplied for the service text. If we look further at the value supplied must be, and then it breaks down the different characters, you'll notice that an apostrophe is not one of the allowed characters, and St Andrew's Hospital has an apostrophe in it. So as a result, the claim is considered invalid. The error does tell us which item on the claim caused the error. So we can see here, error located in medical event 1, service 1 of 1. And so that's the first claim on the first voucher, or first item on the first voucher of this particular claim. In this case, resolving the error will depend on which field has been identified, the service text, and as per the previous error with the service time, this can be resolved by going into the patient's account history, double-clicking on the item, edit it, and then you can retransmit the claim, and that should go through successfully. There are other 9202 errors that you might see. So patient level errors will occur if the field has incorrect characters or is a required field that has been left blank. If so disability code has been left blank for a DVA white card holder, this may result in an error saying that it's in lowercase or not supplied. Item errors may occur if a user-created item has been submitted to Medicare. For example, if you use item 110J, you've created that item and you use the J to identify that it's an inpatient service, it will error because the J is not a number, and Medicare is expecting for MBS items that it should be a number only. And so only numeric characters should be transmitted. Claim level errors could occur as a result of local system settings. So we looked at the timestamp issue where the service time was ahead of the actual claim transmission time, but sometimes it could be that the claim transmission time is ahead of real world time. And that can occur if your computer is set to the wrong region. Let's say you've still got it set to a US region or GMT rather than your actual local location region. Medicare will then see that lodgement date or time as in the future. And so that would be something on your actual computer itself that needs to be resolved. Then provider errors can occur if something is missing or incorrect in the user preferences. So like a provider number is not right, doesn't meet the criteria for the STEM and additional location digits, check digits, and also, of course, as we saw with that facility ID, so if it's been left blank or doesn't meet the criteria. 9202 errors are typically easy to identify because the error text gives us that additional information, and usually it's resolved with a few minor changes to the claim or to the background information that creates that claim, and then retransmitting. 2030 errors are very similar to the 9202 errors. However, they often occur because a particular value has been entered on the claim, but its corresponding details have not been entered. So in the example error I have here, if you tick the not multiple procedure override when creating a claim, Medicare wants further information as to why the multiple procedure rule doesn't apply in this instance. Essentially, you can't submit a not multiple procedure override for a claim that has multiple procedures on it, multiple items, without also putting in the text, service text, as to why. Other examples of 2030 errors include medical event date should not be before the patient's date of birth, for example. That's usually a typo in the service date or the date of birth. Someone's overwritten something, it's jumped back to 2000 and the patient was born in 2005. You're going to end up with an error. Also, the referral issue date must not be after the medical event date. I hope that that is fairly explanatory, but you shouldn't be billing an item that is a referred service with a date that's before the referral it is associated with. Again, probably just a typo in the referral, and it makes sense once you consider what it's actually that error is trying to point out to you. So like with the 9202 errors, these are resolved by going into the relevant area that needs the fix to be made, whether that's the patient's demographic record for a date of birth, the referral details, or the invoice itself, the item, and fixing the incorrect or missing information. From there, the claims can be transmitted from the account history, bulk bill, or DVA transmission area, depending on what you're sending through. The last of the data validation errors I want to talk about is Medicare Online error number 5. These can be a little more challenging to determine the cause, because the error text back from Medicare isn't quite as straightforward as in the previous 9202 and 2030 errors. It's not as easy to read, and it doesn't clue you into which field or item has the issue. In the example here, the invalid string 804500 plus 1000, it's just basically it's an invalid string, which means it's a text field, and a text field is just basically anything that's treated like text, not a number, but it's not matching to what Medicare expects. Now, to me, this looks like a time field has gone wrong. When I see that, especially having just looked at some of those other errors, then I don't know any time that should start with 80. So there aren't many time fields in a claim, and to resolve this, I would find the item on the claim that has this typo, edit the item, and then save it before retransmitting. We do have examples of this error in a couple of circumstances, and they're quite different circumstances where it's occurred, and those are available on the knowledge base with instructions on how to resolve them. So if you can't determine the cause of the error from the knowledge base itself, especially with this error 5, submit a ticket to our Genie support team, and we'll be able to work with you to work out what the issue is and resolve it. So on the back of that, I'll talk a little about how to get help. We've added extra articles to the Genie knowledge base covering the scenarios that have been discussed today, and more, of course, about Medicare Web Services. From within Genie, you can access the contextual articles by going to the File menu and then clicking Help. This will search the knowledge base based on the area of Genie that you were in when you clicked Help. If you require further assistance, you can submit a request directly from the knowledge base to our support team. And we also have email and phone options, which are available for technical support. We have specialized support officers that are focused on assisting with billing issues. So listen out to select the relevant option for billing, for example. Medicare e-business is also a useful resource for many inquiries about claim responses, getting new provider numbers, of course, as well, and retrieving older claim reports, so the ones that are older than 6 months. If you contact Medicare e-business, just remember that transaction ID I mentioned at the start and where to get it, so that you can give them the right information to look up your lodgement. And of course, if you're looking to get additional training at your practice to upskill new or existing staff, we have remote on-site and group training options available if you want something that's more detailed with your practice.